Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Accusation. Isaac Lowe was fixing his fence when Bertha Briggs cornered him. The 60-something woman had always been the neighborhood's self-appointed watchdog, but today her usual nosiness had transformed into something far more sinister. "I know what you did to your child," she hissed, her weathered face twisted with false concern. Isaac straightened up, setting down his hammer. He'd dealt with difficult situations before. 12 years in military intelligence had taught him to stay calm under pressure. "What child? What are you talking about?" "The one crying in your upstairs room. I've called the police." Isaac's blood ran cold. He and his wife Mary had been trying for children for years, but Mary's medical condition made pregnancy impossible. They lived alone in their modest two-story home on Maple Street, and Isaac knew for certain no child had ever cried in their upstairs room. "Bertha, there is no child in my house," Isaac said evenly, but he could see the trap closing around him. Her eyes held a calculating gleam that didn't match her concerned citizen act. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Isaac's mind raced. He was a security consultant now, specializing in corporate espionage prevention. His clients trusted him because of his military background and reputation for integrity. A child abuse accusation would destroy everything he'd built. Detective Jeffrey Abbott arrived with 2 patrol officers. Isaac had seen Abbott around town, but never spoken to him. The detective was younger than expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Lowe, we've received reports of a child in distress at this residence," Abbott said professionally. "Detective, I can assure you there are no children in my home. You're welcome to search." As they entered, Isaac noticed Bertha lingering on the sidewalk, watching intently. Something about her posture struck him as wrong. She seemed less concerned about a child's welfare and more focused on his reaction. The officers methodically searched the ground floor while Isaac waited in his living room, studying the framed photos of his military service. His commendations for intelligence work reminded him that puzzles always had solutions, even when they seemed impossible. "Mr. Lowe," Abbott called from upstairs, his voice tight. "You need to see this." Isaac climbed the stairs with growing dread. In his spare bedroom, the room he and Mary had hoped would become a nursery, Abbott stood beside the closet. The door was open, revealing something that made Isaac's stomach lurch. Dozens of children's belongings were stacked inside. Toys, clothes, shoes, even a small backpack. But these weren't new items waiting for a future child. They were worn, used, each piece tagged with what looked like identification numbers. "I've never seen any of this before," Isaac said, but even to his own ears it sounded weak. Abbott photographed everything while the patrol officers exchanged meaningful glances. Isaac's mind worked furiously. Someone had planted this evidence, but when? How? "Mr. Lowe, I need you to come with us for questioning," Abbott said. As they led him outside, Isaac saw Bertha Briggs watching from her porch, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. Instead of concern or satisfaction, her expression showed something else entirely: fear. She was terrified, and Isaac realized she wasn't the mastermind behind this. She was just another pawn. The real question was who was pulling her strings, and why they wanted Isaac destroyed. Chapter 2. The Setup Unravels. The interrogation room at Millbrook Police Station was deliberately uncomfortable. Hard chairs, fluorescent lighting, and the persistent smell of burnt coffee. Isaac had been here for 3 hours, and Detective Abbott had methodically gone through the same questions multiple times. "Let's try this again, Mr. Lowe. How do you explain the children's items in your home?" Isaac leaned back, calling upon every interrogation technique he'd learned in the military. Stay calm, analyze patterns, find the inconsistencies. "Detective, I've told you, I've never seen those items before today. Someone placed them there. When was the last time you were in that closet?" 2 weeks ago, when my wife asked me to store some winter coats." Isaac paused, remembering. The closet was empty then except for the coats. Abbott made a note. Despite the detective's professional demeanor, Isaac sensed something had shifted in the last hour. The questioning had become less accusatory and more investigative. Tell me about your relationship with Bertha Briggs. There is no relationship. She's a neighbor who complains about everything. My fence, my car, the color I painted my house. Today was the first time she's ever accused me of anything serious. Has she seemed different lately? More agitated than usual? Isaac considered this. Actually, yes. The last few weeks, she's been watching my house more intensely. I caught her taking pictures of my yard from her window. Abbott's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. I'll be back. Alone in the room, Isaac's training kicked in. He studied everything. The placement of the camera, the acoustic tiles that might hide recording equipment, even the coffee stains on the table that could indicate how often this room was used. Most importantly, he analyzed what he'd observed about Abbott's behavior. The detective returned 20 minutes later with a different energy entirely. He sat down and leaned forward, his official mask slipping slightly. Mr. Lowe, I need to ask you something off the record. In your military intelligence work, did you ever deal with human trafficking cases? Isaac's pulse quickened. Occasionally. Why? Because those items in your closet? They don't match any missing children reports in our system. But they do match evidence from a human trafficking case that went cold 18 months ago. The pieces began clicking into place. Isaac's security consulting business had recently taken on several high-profile clients, including a major hotel chain that had been having problems with criminal activity on their properties. His recommendations had resulted in the arrest of several traffickers. Someone's trying to frame me, Isaac said. Abbott nodded slowly. That's what I'm starting to think. But here's the problem. We still have to process this by the book. The evidence is real, even if it was planted. And there are people in this department who won't look past the obvious. What kind of people? The kind who might be getting paid to not look too closely at certain crimes. Abbott checked his watch. I can hold off on formal charges for now, but you need to find out who did this and why. Because if this goes to trial, your military service won't save you. Isaac was released on his own recognizance 2 hours later. The late afternoon sun felt different now. Everything looked the same, but his world had fundamentally shifted. His neighbor's glances lingered too long, and he noticed curtains twitching as he walked to his car. Mary was waiting for him at home, her face pale but determined. Dr. Mary Thompson had always been the calm in any storm, and even now she radiated the quiet strength that had first attracted him to her. How bad is it? She asked. Bad, but not hopeless. Isaac pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Someone's playing a very sophisticated game, and they made one crucial mistake. What's that? They picked the wrong target. Whoever did this doesn't know what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family. That evening, Isaac stood in his home office, surrounded by monitors and communication equipment left over from his consulting work. He began pulling up files, making calls to old contacts, and mapping out what he knew. Bertha Briggs was the key. Her behavior suggested she was being coerced, which meant someone had leverage over her. Isaac smiled grimly. Finding leverage was what he did best. By midnight, he had the beginnings of a plan. It would be risky, potentially illegal, and definitely satisfying. But first, he needed to understand exactly who he was fighting. The game had begun, and Isaac Lowe intended to win. Chapter 3, Gathering Intelligence. Isaac's first stop the next morning was Millbrook Public Library, an institution that still maintained physical records alongside digital ones. Librarian Roseday had been there for 30 years and knew every family's history. Isaac, I heard about yesterday. What a terrible misunderstanding, Rose said, her voice carrying just the right note of sympathy mixed with curiosity. Thanks, Rose. Actually, I'm hoping you might help me understand something. I'm trying to learn more about my neighbor Bertha Briggs. Has she always lived alone? Rose glanced around conspiratorially. Oh, Bertha's had quite the life. She moved here 5 years ago after her husband died. But before that, she leaned closer. She lived in Riverside County, where she worked for Child Protective Services. Isaac's blood chilled. A CPS worker would know exactly how to manipulate evidence and create believable accusations. Did she retire from there? That's the interesting part. She took early retirement very suddenly. Some folks said there was trouble, but nothing official was ever announced. After leaving the library, Isaac drove to Riverside County. His military contacts included Oliver Holt, who now worked private security and owed Isaac several favors. They met at a diner outside the county seat. Oliver looked like what he was, a former Special Forces operator who transitioned to civilian work but never lost his edge. At 45, he was still intimidating enough to end conversations just by walking into a room. "Isaac, you look like hell," Oliver said, sliding into the booth. "I'm being framed for child abuse by a former CPS worker. I need to know why." Oliver's expression darkened. "Give me everything." Isaac laid out the timeline. His recent cases, Bertha's accusation, the planted evidence, and Abbott's revelation about the trafficking connection. Oliver listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his phone. "Your instincts are right," Oliver finally said. "This is too coordinated to be random. Someone with resources and connections is behind this. Can you look into Bertha's time with CPS?" "Already on it. But Isaac, if this connects to human trafficking, you're dealing with people who kill to protect their operations. You need backup. What do you recommend?" Oliver smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "I recommend we find out who's pulling the strings and make them regret targeting you." That afternoon, Isaac returned home to find Mary researching legal strategies. She'd spread case files across their dining room table, her medical training evident in how systematically she approached the problem. "I've been reading about wrongful prosecution cases," she said. "If we can prove the evidence was planted, we have grounds for a civil suit. But we need to identify who did it." Working on that, Isaac showed her what he'd learned about Bertha's background. There's definitely more to this story. Mary studied the timeline he'd created. "Isaac, look at this. The trafficking case Abbott mentioned went cold 18 months ago. That's exactly when you started taking on those hotel security contracts. You think my work disrupted their operation? I think you cost someone a lot of money, and now they want you neutralized." That evening, Oliver called with preliminary findings. Bertha Briggs left CPS after an internal investigation. No charges filed, but there were allegations she'd been taking bribes to falsify reports. Bribes from whom? That's where it gets interesting. The investigation pointed toward a network of people involved in illegal adoptions. Children would be removed from homes based on false reports, then disappear into private adoptions for wealthy clients. Isaac felt pieces clicking into place. So she knows how to work the system. Gets better. Guess who was rumored to be the money man behind the operation? Tell me. Willie Daniel, local city councilman, owns several businesses in Millbrook. Real estate, mostly, but also has interests in consulting services. Isaac recognized the name. Daniel had been in the news recently for his charitable work with at-risk youth. The irony was sickening. "Oliver, I need everything you can find on Willie Daniel. Financial records, business associates, property holdings, everything. What are you planning?" Isaac looked at Mary, who nodded slightly. They'd been married 8 years, and she could read his intentions perfectly. "I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve. But first, I need to understand their entire operation. This could get dangerous. It already is dangerous. The difference is now I know who my enemies are." After Oliver hung up, Isaac sat with Mary on their couch, holding her hand as they watched the neighborhood through their living room window. Across the street, Bertha Briggs' house sat dark except for a single light in the kitchen window. "She's scared," Mary observed. "Look how she keeps checking the locks on her doors. She should be scared, but not of us, of whoever's controlling her. What's our next move?" Isaac smiled, and for the first time in 2 days, it was genuine. "We turn predator into prey. But carefully. These people have already shown they're willing to destroy lives. I need to make sure we don't give them another chance." As they went to bed, Isaac was already formulating phase 1 of his counterattack. He'd spent years learning how criminal networks operated, and he knew their greatest weakness. They always underestimated their victims. That was about to be a fatal mistake. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Isaac began his surveillance of Willie Daniel at dawn, positioning himself in a rented car across from Daniel's real estate office. Years of intelligence work had taught him patience, and today it paid off when he observed Daniel meeting with someone unexpected, Detective Lieutenant Ray Perkins, Jeffrey Abbott's supervisor. The meeting lasted only 10 minutes, but Isaac managed to photograph their interaction through the office window. Perkins handed Daniel an envelope, received what looked like a small package in return, and left through the back exit. Isaac's phone buzzed with a text from Abbott. Need to meet. Urgent. Coffee shop on 3rd Street. Come alone. 20 minutes later, Isaac found Abbott waiting in a corner booth, looking nervous. The detective's usual composure had cracked, revealing someone under significant pressure. We have a problem, Abbott said without preamble. Lieutenant Perkins is pressuring me to file formal charges against you. He says the evidence is overwhelming and the DA's office wants to move quickly. How quickly? Tomorrow morning. Isaac leaned back, processing this information. Jeffrey, what do you know about Ray Perkins? He's been my supervisor for 3 years. Good cop by the book, clean record. Abbott paused. Why? Isaac showed him the photographs from the morning surveillance. Abbott's face went pale as he studied the images. Son of a bitch, he whispered. How long has this been going on? That's what I intend to find out. But first, I need you to buy me some time. Ow! Can you delay the charges for 48 hours? Claim you need to verify the evidence chain of custody or something? Abbott considered this. Maybe. But if Perkins gets suspicious, he'll just assign another detective to the case. Then we need to give him something else to worry about. That afternoon, Isaac met with Oliver Holt at an industrial park outside town. Oliver had brought surveillance equipment and tactical gear, enough to outfit a small military operation. I found your smoking gun, Oliver announced, setting up a laptop. Willie Daniel doesn't just own real estate. He owns the storage facility where the trafficking victims were held 18 months ago. Isaac studied the property records Oliver displayed. The same facility the police never fully investigated, because the investigation was shut down by Ray Perkins, citing lack of evidence. How many people are in on this? At minimum, Daniel, Perkins, and Bertha, but probably others. This kind of operation needs lawyers, judges, social workers, a whole network. Isaac's phone rang. Mary's name appeared on the screen. Isaac, you need to come home now, she said, her voice tight with controlled fear. Bertha Briggs is at our front door, and she's acting very strange. I'm on my way. Don't open the door. Isaac and Oliver reached the house in 15 minutes. Bertha stood on the front porch, pacing and muttering to herself. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Mrs. Briggs, Isaac called from the sidewalk. Is everything all right? She spun toward him, her eyes wild. They know you're asking questions. They know about the detective helping you. Who knows? The people I work for. They're not happy about the complications. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These people, they've killed before. Then why are you here? Because they told me to give you a message. Her hands shook as she pulled a folded paper from her pocket. If you don't plead guilty and take whatever deal they offer, they'll do to your wife what they did to the children. Isaac took the paper, fury building in his chest. The message was typed, untraceable. Stop digging or Dr. Thompson joins our collection permanently. Oliver stepped forward, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. Ma'am, you're going to tell us everything you know about this operation. Right now. Bertha looked between them, clearly terrified. I can't. You don't know what they're capable of. Actually, I do, Isaac said quietly. I've spent my career learning exactly what people like this are capable of. But here's what they don't know about me. He stepped closer to Bertha, and she saw something in his eyes that made her back up against the porch railing. I'm capable of much worse things than they are. And if they threaten my wife again, they're going to discover just how creative I can be. Mary appeared in the doorway. Isaac, bring her inside. She's shaking. Against Isaac's better judgment, they brought Bertha into the living room. Mary, drawing on her medical training, provided tea and created a calming environment. Sometimes the soft approach worked better than intimidation. Bertha, how long have you been working for these people? Mary asked gently. 5 years. Ever since I left Riverside County. Bertha's voice was barely a whisper. They approached me after the CPS investigation, so they could make my problems disappear if I helped them occasionally. What kind of help? At first, just information. Which families were having problems, which children might be removed from homes. Then it got worse. Isaac sat forward. What do you mean worse? They wanted me to create problems, make false reports, plant evidence of abuse, testify in custody hearings. Tears ran down her weathered face. I told myself I was helping children, but I knew better. Why didn't you go to the police? Because they have evidence of what I did. Videos, documents, recordings. If I don't cooperate, I go to prison for the rest of my life. Oliver exchanged a look with Isaac. What about Willie Daniel? What's his role? He's the money man. He finds the buyers, arranges the adoptions, handles the payments. But he's not the boss. Then who is? Bertha's hands shook harder. I don't know his real name. Everyone calls him the patron. He has people everywhere. Police, courts, social services. That's how they knew you were investigating. Isaac stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful, but he now understood it was all an illusion. Predators lived among them, protected by corruption and fear. Bertha, here's what's going to happen, he said, turning back to her. You're going to help us bring down this entire operation. In exchange, I'll make sure you're protected when it's over. They'll kill me. Not if we get them first. Oliver smiled grimly. Isaac's right. We got enough to start dismantling their network. But we need to move fast before they realize how much we know. Isaac looked at his wife, who nodded her agreement. Mary had always supported his dangerous work because she understood that some fights were worth the risk. All right, Isaac said. Time to go hunting. Chapter 5. Setting the Trap. Isaac's plan required precise timing and multiple moving parts. He'd spent the previous evening coordinating with Oliver and Jeffrey Abbott, while Mary worked on keeping Bertha calm and extracting more details about the operation. The first phase targeted Willie Daniel's financial network. Isaac had learned from Bertha that Daniel kept detailed records of all transactions, a necessity for managing payments between buyers and sellers in the trafficking operation. Those records were stored in a safe at his real estate office, along with backup files at his home. Oliver handled the technical aspects, using equipment that officially didn't exist to monitor Daniel's communications and track his movements. By Wednesday morning, they knew Daniel would be at a city council meeting until late afternoon, leaving his office vulnerable. Remember, we need clean evidence, Isaac reminded Abbott as they prepared to execute the break-in. Nothing that can be thrown out of court on technicalities. Abbott looked uncomfortable with the plan's legally gray areas, but the threats against Mary had convinced him that normal procedures wouldn't work. I've got a warrant application ready. Once we find evidence of trafficking, I can make it official retroactively. That's not how warrants work, Oliver pointed out. It is if the evidence prevents imminent harm to potential victims. Isaac appreciated Abbott's willingness to bend rules, but he also knew they'd only get one chance. If Daniel's network realized they were exposed, they'd disappear along with any evidence of their crimes. The real estate office occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street. Isaac and Oliver entered through the rear door using lockpicks that left no trace of forced entry. The building's old construction worked in their favor. Thick walls dampened sound, and the layout provided multiple escape routes. Daniel's office was on the second floor, decorated with photos of him receiving various civic awards and shaking hands with prominent citizens. Isaac found it nauseating how many people had been fooled by the man's charitable facade. The safe was hidden behind a painting of Millbrook's founding families. Oliver made quick work of the electronic lock using a device that cycled through possible combinations faster than humanly possible. Jesus Christ. Oliver breathed as the safe opened. Inside were dozens of files containing photographs, financial records, and correspondence related to the trafficking operation. Isaac photographed everything with a high-resolution camera, while Oliver downloaded files from Daniel's computer. The scope of the operation was staggering. Over the past 5 years, they'd facilitated the illegal adoption of nearly 50 children, generating millions in revenue. The file showed a sophisticated network extending across 3 states, with corrupt officials at every level of the system. Isaac, look at this, Oliver called from the computer. He'd found encrypted communications between Daniel and someone identified only as TP, presumably the patron. The messages revealed that Isaac's investigation had indeed triggered panic in their organization. More disturbing, they showed plans to eliminate Isaac, Mary, and Detective Abbott as threats to their operation. "We need to get out of here," Isaac said, but as he spoke, they heard voices in the hallway below. Daniel had returned early from the council meeting, and he wasn't alone. Isaac recognized Ray Perkins' voice, along with two other men they didn't identify. "Told you this was getting out of hand," Perkins was saying. "The detective's asking too many questions, and now the military guy has outside help." "It's handled," Daniel replied. "The patron has people in place. All three of them will be taken care of tonight." Isaac and Oliver exchanged grim looks. They were trapped on the second floor with evidence that could bring down the entire network. But first they had to survive the next few minutes. "Back window," Oliver whispered. Isaac shook his head. The drop was too far, and they'd be exposed crossing the yard. Instead, he pointed to a closet that backed up against the building's old servant stairs, a hidden passage common in Victorian houses. They slipped into the closet just as footsteps approached Daniel's office. Isaac held his breath as the door opened and Daniel entered with his companions. "The safe's still locked," Daniel said with relief. "Must have been paranoia." "Paranoia keeps us alive," replied an unfamiliar voice with a slight accent. "The patron wants the military man eliminated tonight. Make it look like a home invasion." "What about his wife?" "Collateral damage. And the detective dies in a car accident tomorrow morning." Isaac's vision went red. These people were calmly discussing murdering his wife as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. He started to move, but Oliver grabbed his arm and shook his head slightly. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, providing crucial intelligence about their immediate plans and the network structure. When the voices finally moved away, Isaac and Oliver waited 15 more minutes before emerging from their hiding spot. "We have to warn Abbott and get Mary to safety," Isaac whispered. They escaped through the servants' stairs, which led to a door in the building's foundation. By the time they reached Isaac's car, both men were focused on one objective: turning the hunters into the hunted. Isaac called Mary first. "Pack a bag and go to your sister's house in Springfield. Don't ask questions, just go. I'll explain later." "Isaac, what's happening?" "They're coming for us tonight. Please, just trust me and go." His second call was to Abbott. "Jeffrey, you need to disappear for the next 24 hours. They're planning to kill you." "What? How do you know?" "Because we just heard them planning it. Can you get somewhere safe?" "My brother's cabin upstate." "But Isaac, if they're moving against us, then it's time to move against them first." Isaac and Oliver drove to a safe house Oliver maintained for situations exactly like this one. The small apartment was equipped with weapons, communications gear, and supplies for an extended siege. "What's the play?" Oliver asked as they reviewed the evidence they gathered. Isaac studied the photographs and documents spread across the table. The network was extensive, but every criminal organization had vulnerabilities. The key was finding the right pressure point. "We're going to do what they least expect," Isaac said. "Instead of running, we're going after the patron tonight." "How?" "We don't even know who he is." Isaac smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who'd finally found his prey. "Actually, we do. Look at the communication patterns and financial flows. There's only one person in this town with the resources and connections to run an operation this sophisticated." Oliver studied the data more carefully. Then his eyes widened as he reached the same conclusion. "Son of a bitch. It's been hiding in plain sight." Isaac nodded. "Tomorrow morning, Millbrook is going to wake up to a very different world. But first, we need to make sure none of us see tomorrow if the patron has his way." Outside, darkness fell over the town, and somewhere in that darkness, killers were preparing to eliminate the last threats to a trafficking network that had operated with impunity for years. But Isaac Lowe had spent his career hunting people who thought they were untouchable. Tonight, he would remind them that everyone was vulnerable if you knew where to strike. Chapter 6: The Patron Revealed. Isaac and Oliver spent the evening analyzing the evidence and preparing for what Isaac suspected would be the most dangerous night of his life. The files from Daniel's safe painted a clear picture of the trafficking network structure, but more importantly, they revealed the identity of the patron. "It makes perfect sense," Oliver said, studying the financial records. He's had access to vulnerable families through his position. He's got the political connections to protect the operation, and he's been publicly advocating for child welfare while privately destroying lives. Isaac stared at a photograph of Judge Henry Sheridan receiving a humanitarian award. Sheridan had been Millbrook's most respected family court judge for 15 years, known for his compassionate handling of custody cases and his charitable work with foster children. In reality, he'd been using his position to identify children who could disappear without causing too much investigation. How many cases has he handled where children were removed from homes based on Bertha's false reports? Isaac asked. At least 30 that we can identify, probably more that were handled through other channels. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Families had trusted Sheridan with their most precious possessions, and he'd systematically sold their children to wealthy buyers who didn't ask questions about paperwork irregularities. Isaac's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your wife is safer now. Come to Millbrook Cemetery, Section 7, midnight. Come alone or she dies. They have Mary, Isaac said, his voice deadly calm. Oliver looked up from the files. That's impossible. She went to her sister's house in Springfield. Isaac called Mary's sister, but the phone went straight to voicemail. A follow-up call to Springfield police confirmed his worst fears. 2 women matching Mary and her sister's descriptions had been taken from a house on Elm Street 3 hours earlier. How did they find her so fast? Oliver asked. Isaac was already moving, checking weapons and gathering equipment. Because Judge Sheridan has access to police databases, court records, everything. He probably knew about Mary's sister before I did. This is obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, but they made one crucial mistake. What's that? Isaac's expression was colder than Oliver had ever seen it. They assumed I'd come alone. Millbrook Cemetery had been established in 1847. Its old section filled with elaborate Victorian monuments and sprawling oak trees that blocked most of the ambient light from town. Section 7 was the oldest part, where the founding families were buried among crumbling headstones and overgrown paths. Isaac approached the cemetery on foot, using night vision equipment to scan for threats. Oliver was positioned on the hilltop overlooking the entire area, equipped with a sniper rifle and communications gear. Detective Abbott waited in a patrol car at the cemetery's main entrance, ready to call for backup once they had Mary safely away from her captors. At exactly midnight, Isaac reached Section 7. A single figure stood among the headstones, Judge Henry Sheridan, looking nothing like the distinguished jurist who appeared in newspaper photos. Tonight, he seemed smaller, more predatory, like a spider waiting in the center of its web. Mr. Lowe, Sheridan called softly. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. Where's my wife? Safe, for the moment. But that depends entirely on your willingness to be reasonable. Isaac moved closer, noting the positions of at least 3 other men hidden among the monuments. Oliver's voice crackled quietly through his earpiece. I have eyes on 4 hostiles. Mary's not here. What do you want? Isaac asked. Sheridan smiled, and in the darkness it looked like a death's head grin. I want you to understand that you've been fighting forces far beyond your comprehension. This isn't just about Millbrook. We're part of something much larger. A network that steals children and sells them to the highest bidder. A network that provides services to people with specific needs. Wealthy couples who can't navigate traditional adoption processes, individuals with particular tastes, researchers who require test subjects. Sheridan's voice carried no shame, only cold calculation. We fulfill demand that would otherwise go underground to far less professional organizations. Isaac fought down the urge to put a bullet in Sheridan's head immediately. He needed information about Mary's location first. Why target me specifically? Because your security recommendations cost us 2 major operations. The hotel chain you consulted for was one of our primary transit points. When they implemented your protocols, it disrupted supply chains we'd spent years establishing. So this was revenge. This was business. You were a problem that needed to be eliminated, along with anyone who might continue your work. Isaac heard Oliver's voice in his earpiece. Movement in the woods behind you. At least 2 more hostiles approaching. The trap was closing, But Isaac had expected this. He'd spent years studying criminal psychology, and people like Sheridan always needed to gloat before they killed. "Judge, you've made one crucial error in your planning," Isaac said. "What's that?" "You assumed I was the only threat you needed to worry about." Isaac dropped to the ground just as Oliver's rifle cracked from the hilltop. One of Sheridan's men fell immediately, followed by the sharp reports of Abbott's sidearm as the detective moved through the cemetery's main entrance, taking out the men who'd been approaching from behind. Sheridan pulled a pistol, but Isaac was already moving. Years of military training took over as he rolled behind a large headstone and returned fire. The judge was skilled with his weapon, but he'd never faced someone with Isaac's combat experience. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When the shooting stopped, Sheridan lay wounded among the headstones, his remaining men either dead or fled into the woods. Isaac knelt beside the judge, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the man's temple. "Where's my wife?" Sheridan coughed, blood speckling his lips. "The old Riverside storage facility. Building 7. But you're too late. If we don't check in by 12:30, they have orders to eliminate all the witnesses." Isaac checked his watch. 12:22. The storage facility was 15 minutes away, even driving at dangerous speeds. "Oliver, did you get that? Already moving to my vehicle. I can make it in 12 minutes. Abbott appeared among the headstones, his weapon drawn. "Is it over?" "Not yet," Isaac replied. "Call for ambulances and backup. Then meet us at Riverside Storage. And Jeffrey, bring everything. If Mary and the others are still alive, tonight's the night we end this entire operation." As sirens began wailing in the distance, Isaac looked down at Judge Henry Sheridan. The man who'd spent 15 years destroying families in the name of profit was now facing his own mortality, and the fear in his eyes was more honest than anything he'd said in years. "Judge, I want you to understand something," Isaac said quietly. "You picked the wrong family to threaten, and now you're going to pay for every child you sold, every family you destroyed, and every life you ruined." Sheridan tried to speak, but Isaac was already running toward his car. Mary was still out there, and time was running out. The final confrontation was waiting. Chapter 7. The Rescue. Isaac pushed his car to dangerous speeds through Millbrook's empty streets, Oliver's motorcycle roaring alongside him as they raced toward Riverside Storage. The facility sprawled across 20 acres on the industrial side of town, its dozens of buildings connected by narrow service roads that would provide excellent concealment for Sheridan's remaining associates. Building 7 is in the center of the complex. Oliver's voice crackled through the radio. Multiple exit routes, but also multiple positions for ambushes. Isaac checked his watch. 12:29. They had less than a minute before the deadline, assuming Sheridan had been telling the truth about the timing. In his experience, desperate criminals often lied about such details, but he couldn't risk being wrong. They ditched their vehicles at the facility's main gate and approached on foot. The storage complex was poorly lit, with long shadows between buildings that could hide an army of gunmen. Isaac's night vision equipment revealed movement in at least 3 locations. Too many hostiles to engage directly without risking Mary's safety. "I'm going for Building 7, Isaac whispered into his radio. "You take the high ground and provide overwatch." Oliver was already moving toward a maintenance ladder that led to the roof of Building 3. From there, he'd have sight lines across most of the complex. Isaac moved through the shadows like the ghost he'd been trained to be in military intelligence. His years of field work had taught him to become invisible when necessary, and tonight invisibility meant the difference between saving his wife and losing everything that mattered to him. Building 7 was larger than the others, with loading docks on 3 sides and a single entrance marked with security warnings. Isaac could see light coming from inside, unusual for a storage facility at this hour. More importantly, he could hear voices. Said 12:30, and it's already past that. Someone was arguing. "Give it 5 more minutes." The judge is thorough, but he's not always punctual. Isaac circled the building, looking for alternate entry points. A ventilation grate on the north side had been modified with hinges, clearly an emergency escape route. He slipped through it into what appeared to be an unused storage unit. The voices were clearer now, coming from the central area of the building. Isaac counted at least 4 different speakers, all male, all armed based on the metallic sounds accompanying their movements. "Don't like this," one was saying. "Too many things have gone wrong tonight." "Relax," replied a voice Isaac recognized as Willie Daniels. "Sheridan's handled worse situations than this. By morning, our problems will be eliminated and we can get back to business." Isaac peered through a gap in the storage unit's wall and saw the scene that made his blood freeze. Mary was tied to a chair in the center of the open area, conscious but clearly terrified. Her sister Ellen sat beside her in similar restraints. Both women had been beaten, though not severely yet. 4 men stood around them, all armed with pistols. Willie Daniel paced nervously while checking his phone. 2 others Isaac didn't recognize maintained watch positions near the entrance. The 4th, a large man with prison tattoos, seemed to be enjoying the women's fear a little too much. Isaac's training warred with his rage. The smart tactical move was to wait for backup, create a distraction, and engage the hostiles from a position of advantage. But every second of delay meant more trauma for Mary and Ellen. His decision was made when the tattooed man reached toward Mary with clear intention to harm her. Isaac shot him through the wall of the storage unit. The sound of gunfire in the enclosed space was deafening, causing momentary confusion among the remaining hostiles. Isaac used those crucial seconds to burst through the unit's door and engage the next closest target. Military training kicked in completely. Isaac moved with deadly precision, using the storage units as cover while systematically eliminating threats. Willie Daniel tried to use Mary as a human shield, but Isaac's marksmanship training had included hostage scenarios. A single shot took Daniel down without endangering the women. The entire firefight lasted less than 90 seconds. When the echoes faded, Isaac was kneeling beside Mary's chair, cutting through her restraints with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking her for injuries. "We're okay," Mary said, though her voice was hoarse from stress. "Isaac, there are others. They have children here." "Where?" Ellen spoke up, her voice stronger than Isaac had expected. "Building 12. They brought us here first, and we saw them moving kids into that building." Oliver's voice crackled through the radio. "Isaac, we've got company. 3 vehicles approaching fast from the east entrance." "How long?" 2 minutes, maybe less." Isaac helped Mary and Ellen to their feet. Both women were shaken but mobile. "Can you make it to the fence line?" "Yes," Mary said firmly. "Go get those children." Isaac's heart swelled with pride for his wife's strength, but there wasn't time for sentiment. Building 12 was across the complex, and Sheridan's reinforcements would arrive before he could make the trip on foot. "Oliver, I need a distraction." "On it." Explosions bloomed throughout the storage complex as Oliver began detonating charges he'd placed during his approach. The diversions would confuse the incoming hostiles and provide cover for Isaac's movement. Building 12 was locked with electronic security, but Isaac's equipment made quick work of it. Inside, he found something that would haunt his dreams forever. 24 children ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, all showing signs of prolonged confinement and trauma. "It's okay," Isaac called out, raising his hands to show he wasn't armed. "I'm here to help. We're getting you out of here." The older children had clearly been conditioned to fear adults, but desperation overcame caution when they heard gunfire approaching the building. Isaac began leading them toward the exit, carrying 2 of the smaller ones who couldn't walk fast enough. Abbott's police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as backup finally arrived. Isaac emerged from Building 12 to find Oliver providing covering fire from his rooftop position, while Sheridan's reinforcements took defensive positions around the complex. "This way," Isaac shouted to the children, leading them toward a break in the perimeter fence that Oliver had created with his explosives. The sight that greeted police and paramedics would become the stuff of legend in Millbrook. Isaac Lowe walking through smoke and chaos with nearly 24 rescued children, his wife and sister-in-law helping to guide the traumatized victims to safety, while his military friend provided precision fire support against the remaining criminals. But even as ambulances arrived and began treating the children, Isaac knew the night wasn't over. They'd rescued the victims and eliminated most of the network soldiers, but the corruption ran deeper than just Sheridan and his immediate associates. Jeffrey, Isaac called to Abbott as the detective coordinated the crime scene. We need to move fast on the rest of the network. Once word gets out about tonight, the others will disappear. Abbott nodded grimly. I've already called the state police and FBI. With the evidence you gathered and the children as witnesses, we can roll up everyone connected to this operation. Isaac looked around at the devastation of the storage complex, then at Mary as she comforted a crying child. His wife caught his eye and nodded slightly. The same look of determination that had carried them through 8 years of marriage and would carry them through whatever came next. The network that had terrorized children and destroyed families for years was finally broken. But Isaac's work wasn't finished until every person involved faced justice. Tomorrow would bring arrests, trials, and a long process of healing for the victims. Tonight, Isaac Lowe had done what he'd sworn to do: protect his family and make his enemies pay for their crimes. But he had one more gift for those who'd threatened the woman he loved. Chapter 8. Justice and Reckoning. The next 72 hours transformed Millbrook from a quiet suburban town into the center of a federal investigation. FBI agents swarmed through the storage facility, Daniel's real estate office, and Judge Sheridan's chambers, collecting evidence of what prosecutors would later call the most extensive child trafficking operation uncovered in the region's history. Isaac spent most of that time in debriefings, walking federal agents through the evidence he and Oliver had gathered. The military precision of their investigation impressed even seasoned FBI professionals, though Isaac noticed some discomfort with the irregular methods they'd employed. Mr. Lowe, Special Agent Candace Hendricks said during their final interview, "Your background obviously prepared you well for this type of investigation. But some of your actions, the break-ins, the surveillance without warrants, the armed confrontations, they create complications for prosecution." Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying the agent across the table. "Special Agent Hendricks, with respect, your by-the-book approach would have resulted in the deaths of my wife, 24 children, and at least 1 police officer. Sometimes complications are preferable to body bags. Nevertheless, defense attorneys will challenge evidence obtained through illegal means. Then I guess you'll have to be very creative about explaining how you obtained it." Detective Abbott, who'd been largely silent during the debriefing, finally spoke up. "Agent Hendricks, Isaac's evidence led us to identify over 40 victims across 3 states. We've got confessions from 3 network members, financial records going back 5 years, and testimony from children who can identify their captors. Any decent prosecutor can make this case without worrying about search warrant technicalities." Hendricks nodded reluctantly. The scope of the investigation had indeed provided overwhelming evidence of criminal activity, much of it directly admissible regardless of how the initial intelligence was gathered. "What about Judge Sheridan?" Isaac asked. "He's cooperating fully. Facing life in prison tends to make people talkative." Hendricks consulted her notes. "He's provided information about network operations in 7 other states. This case is going to trigger investigations across the entire region." Isaac felt a grim satisfaction. Sheridan's network had operated for years by maintaining secrecy and exploiting corruption. Now their own records would be used to dismantle similar operations throughout the country. That evening, Isaac returned home for the first time since the confrontation at the cemetery. Mary was in the kitchen, cooking dinner as if nothing had happened. But Isaac noticed subtle changes. The way she positioned herself to see all the entrances, the tactical pen on the counter within easy reach, the slight tension in her shoulders that spoke of someone who'd experienced real danger and would never feel completely safe again. "How are you handling all this?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Better than I expected," she said, leaning into his embrace. "The children at the hospital are responding well to treatment. Physical trauma heals faster than psychological damage, but they're resilient." Isaac had visited the rescued children at Millbrook General, where Mary and her medical colleagues were overseeing their care. The sight of those young faces, some defiant, some terrified, all bearing the invisible scars of their ordeal, had reinforced his conviction that their actions had been not just justified, but necessary. "Any word on permanent placements?" he asked. "Social services is working on it, but it's complicated. Many of these children were stolen from families who thought they were dead. There will be legal battles over custody, not to mention the trauma of reunification after years of separation." Isaac had been thinking about this problem. The network's files contained detailed records of which children had been taken from which families, but legal proof would take time to establish. Meanwhile, the children needed stability and care. "I've been talking with Oliver about something," he said, "a foundation to provide support for the victims, legal assistance, therapy, financial help for families during the reunification process." Mary pulled back to look at him. "That's a wonderful idea. How would it work?" "Oliver has connections in the private security world, people with resources who understand the importance of protecting children. I have my military contacts. Between us, we can raise significant funding." "And you'd run this foundation?" Isaac shook his head. "You would. You understand the medical and psychological aspects better than anyone. I'd handle the security and investigative side when needed." Mary considered this. "It would mean leaving my practice. Only if you want to. The foundation could be part-time initially, growing as the need becomes clear." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Isaac tensed automatically. Unexpected visitors had become threatening rather than welcome, but relaxed when he saw Oliver through the peephole. "Hope I'm not interrupting," Oliver said as Isaac let him in. "But I thought you'd want to see this." He handed Isaac a newspaper. The headline read, "Millbrook Trafficking Ring Exposed. Local Heroes Save Children." Below, it was a photo of Isaac carrying one of the rescued toddlers from a storage facility. "You're famous," Oliver said with a grin. Isaac grimaced. "I hate publicity. Too late for that. The story's going national. CNN wants an interview, along with half a dozen other networks." Mary read over Isaac's shoulder. "It's a good article. They focus on the children and the investigation, not sensationalizing the violence." Speaking of the investigation, Oliver continued, "I got a call from Agent Hendricks this afternoon. Seems the FBI is interested in our consulting services for similar cases." "What kind of consulting?" "The kind where government resources aren't sufficient, and they need people with specialized skills and fewer bureaucratic constraints." Isaac understood immediately. Law enforcement agencies often face limitations that prevented them from acting quickly enough to save lives. Private consultants operating in legal gray areas could sometimes accomplish what official investigations could not. "Interesting," Isaac said. "What did you tell her?" "That we consider it on a case-by-case basis." Mary looked between them. "You're talking about making this permanent, aren't you? Hunting people like Sheridan's network." Isaac sat down beside her. "Only if you're comfortable with it. After what we've been through, I understand if you want a quieter life." Mary was silent for a long moment, staring at the newspaper photo. "Isaac, do you know what I kept thinking about while we were tied up in that storage facility?" "What?" "All the other children who went through the same thing, but didn't have someone like you willing to fight for them." She looked up at him with the fierce determination he'd fallen in love with. "If we can prevent other families from experiencing what we went through, then yes, I'm comfortable with making this permanent." Oliver smiled. "In that case, I should mention that Agent Hendricks also said there's a substantial reward for information leading to the conviction of trafficking networks. Between Sheridan's operation and the connected cases they're developing, we're looking at enough money to fund that foundation for years." Isaac felt something settling into place, a sense of purpose that went beyond just seeking justice for his own family. He discovered something during the investigation. He was very good at hunting predators, and the world was full of predators who thought they were untouchable. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this right. Professional standards, legal boundaries where possible, and we never forget that we're fighting for the victims, not for revenge." Mary squeezed his hand. "What do we call this foundation?" Isaac thought about the children's faces at the hospital, the families being reunited after years of separation, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing Judge Sheridan in handcuffs. "The Low Foundation for Child Protection," he said, "because every child deserves someone willing to fight for them." "Outside," Millbrook was returning to normal. But for Isaac and Mary Lowe, normal had been redefined forever. They discovered that evil often wore respectable faces and operated from positions of trust. But they'd also discovered that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when protecting those they loved. The foundation would be their way of extending that protection to children who had no one else to fight for them. And Isaac Lowe was just getting started. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 6 months after the destruction of Judge Sheridan's trafficking network, Isaac stood in the offices of the Lowe Foundation for Child Protection, reviewing case files that had arrived from law enforcement agencies across the country. The Foundation's success in reuniting families and supporting trafficking victims had generated requests for assistance that far exceeded their current capacity. "We need more staff," Mary said, entering the office with coffee and a stack of medical reports. "The therapy program alone requires 3 more counselors, and that's just to handle current cases." Isaac nodded, studying a map on the wall marked with pins representing active investigations. Red pins indicated confirmed trafficking operations, yellow pins showed suspected networks, and green pins marked successful interventions. The map looked like a war zone, which in many ways it was. "Oliver's bringing in 2 more investigators next month," Isaac said, both former military with specialized training. "And Agent Hendricks says the FBI wants to expand our consulting contract. Can we handle the expansion? We'll have to. Look at these numbers." Isaac showed her the latest statistics. Since Sheridan's arrest, his cooperation has led to the identification of 43 connected operations across 12 states. Each network we dismantle creates new cases, new victims who need support. Mary settled into her chair, reviewing the medical files she'd brought. "The good news is that recovery rates are higher than expected. Children are resilient, especially when they receive proper care and have family support." Isaac smiled at the pride in her voice. Mary had thrown herself into the Foundation's work with the same dedication she'd brought to her medical practice. Her combination of clinical expertise and personal experience with trauma made her uniquely qualified to develop treatment protocols for trafficking victims. The door opened and Detective Abbott entered, followed by a woman Isaac didn't recognize. "Isaac, Mary, I'd like you to meet District Attorney Melissa Howe. She's prosecuting the Sheridan case and wanted to discuss some developments." Howe was younger than Isaac had expected, but carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes litigation. She shook hands professionally before taking a seat at their conference table. "Mr. and Mrs. Lowe, first let me say that your work on this case has been exemplary. Without your investigation, we never would have uncovered the full scope of the network." "Thank you," Isaac said. "What can we do for you?" Judge Sheridan's trial begins next month, and his defense team is mounting an aggressive challenge to the evidence. They're claiming that most of our case is based on illegally obtained materials. Mary leaned forward. "What does that mean for the prosecution?" "It means we need your testimony to establish how the evidence was discovered. The jury needs to understand that you were acting as concerned citizens protecting your family, not as vigilantes seeking revenge." Isaac considered this. "Ms. Howe, with respect, we were seeking revenge. The difference is that we channeled it constructively." "That's exactly the wrong thing to say in court," Abbott warned. "But it's the truth, and juries appreciate honesty." Isaac turned to the prosecutor. "Ms. Howe, what's your real concern here?" "My real concern is that Sheridan's lawyers will portray you as dangerous individuals who used illegal methods to frame an innocent man. They're going to argue that everything you discovered was planted or fabricated. Then you need to focus on the children's testimony. 24 victims who can identify their captors and describe their experiences. That's not fabricated evidence." Howe nodded. "You're right, but the defense will claim the children were coached or that their trauma makes their testimony unreliable. Your investigation provides the corroborating evidence that proves their stories are true." Mary spoke up. "What do you need from us?" "Complete transparency about your methods and motives. If the jury understands that you were fighting to save your wife and other victims, they'll forgive the irregular procedures." Isaac and Mary exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility extensively, that their actions during the investigation would be scrutinized in court and potentially criticized by people who never faced similar threats. Ms. Howe will testify truthfully about everything we did and why we did it, Isaac said finally. But we won't apologize for saving lives. I wouldn't ask you to. After Howe and Abbott left, Isaac and Mary sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the upcoming trial. Are you ready for this? Mary asked eventually. To testify? Yes. To watch Sheridan's lawyers try to make us look like the criminals? That'll be harder. Isaac, what we did wasn't just right. It was necessary. Without our investigation, those children would still be imprisoned, and other children would have joined them. Isaac nodded, but he was thinking beyond the trial. Mary, I want to show you something. He led her to a locked filing cabinet and withdrew a folder marked Project Sanctuary. What's this? A proposal I've been developing with Oliver and some of our military contacts. A training program for law enforcement and private investigators focused on trafficking cases. Mary read through the proposal, her eyebrows rising as she absorbed the details. Isaac, this is massive. You're talking about creating a national network of specialists. Trafficking networks are highly organized and well-funded. They have sophisticated methods and international connections. Law enforcement agencies need comparable expertise to fight them effectively. And you want to provide that expertise. I want to ensure that what happened to us and to those children never happens to another family. Mary closed the folder and looked at him with the expression that had captured his heart 8 years earlier. When do we start? The trial of Judge Henry Sheridan began on a cold Monday morning in February. Isaac and Mary arrived at the courthouse to find media crews and protesters gathered on the steps. Signs reading "Justice for Children" competed with others proclaiming due process matters. Inside, the courtroom was packed with spectators, including many of the families whose children had been victims of Sheridan's network. Isaac noticed that several of the rescued children, now healthier and showing signs of recovery, sat with their families in the gallery. Sheridan looked smaller than Isaac remembered, diminished by months in custody and the weight of overwhelming evidence against him. His legal team was impressive. 3 expensive attorneys who'd built careers defending white-collar criminals. District Attorney Howe's opening statement was masterful, painting a clear picture of the trafficking network while acknowledging the unconventional methods used to expose it. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will hear evidence of crimes so heinous that they challenge our faith in human decency. You will also hear criticism of the investigation that brought these crimes to light. I ask you to remember that sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms, and sometimes justice requires ordinary citizens to take extraordinary risks. When Isaac was called to testify, he walked to the witness stand with the same calm confidence he'd carried into combat zones. The packed courtroom fell silent as he was sworn in. Mr. Lowe, Howe began, please tell the jury what happened on the morning of September 15th when Mrs. Briggs approached you. Isaac told the story simply and clearly, from Bertha's accusation through the discovery of planted evidence to his realization that he was being framed. When he described finding Mary and the children at the storage facility, several jurors were visibly moved. Sheridan's defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Colin Pineda, rose for cross-examination with obvious relish. Mr. Lowe, isn't it true that you broke into my client's office without a warrant? Yes. And that you photographed confidential client files? Yes. You also engaged in surveillance of Judge Sheridan without legal authorization? That's correct. Pineda smiled, clearly expecting Isaac to become defensive. Instead, Isaac remained calm and cooperative. So you admit that you violated numerous laws during your so-called investigation? I admit that I used whatever means necessary to save my wife's life and protect 24 children from continued abuse. Mr. Lowe, do you believe that citizens have the right to take the law into their own hands? Isaac looked directly at the jury. I believe that when the system fails to protect innocent people, good men and women have a responsibility to act. Everything I did was focused on saving lives, not seeking personal gain. But you had no legal authority. Mr. Pineda, I had the authority that every person has when they witness crimes against children. I had the authority of conscience and the responsibility that comes with having the skills to help. The cross-examination continued for 2 hours, but Pineda never managed to shake Isaac's composure or make him appear vindictive. When Mary testified the following day, her medical expertise and obvious compassion for the victims provided powerful support for the prosecution's case. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Judge Sheridan's defense team tried every possible strategy, questioning the evidence, attacking the investigation, even suggesting that their client was being scapegoated by the real criminals. But the testimony of the rescued children was devastating, and the financial records left no room for alternative explanations. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Henry Sheridan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Isaac and Mary left the courthouse, they were surrounded by reporters shouting questions about their future plans and the foundation's work. Isaac paused on the steps to make a brief statement. Justice was served today, but our work isn't finished. There are other networks, other victims, other families who need protection. The Low Foundation will continue fighting for children who have no one else to fight for them. That evening, at a celebration dinner attended by the investigation team and victim families, Isaac received a call from Agent Hendricks. Isaac, congratulations on the conviction. But I'm calling about something else. We've identified a trafficking network in Colorado that follows the same pattern as Sheridan's operation. Are you and your team available for consultation? Isaac looked around the restaurant, at the children laughing with their families, at Mary discussing therapy programs with other parents, at Oliver and Abbott planning their next training seminar. Agent Hendricks will be there tomorrow. As Isaac hung up, Mary appeared beside him. Another case, another chance to make sure no family goes through what we did. Mary smiled and took his hand. Then let's get to work. Outside, Millbrook sparkled under spring stars, a town forever changed by the events of the past year. But in a restaurant filled with survivors and heroes, Isaac and Mary Lowe were already planning their next mission. Because some fights are worth a lifetime of commitment, and some victories are just the beginning of larger wars. The foundation that had started as an act of vengeance had become something greater, a beacon of hope for children who needed to know that someone, somewhere, was willing to fight for them. Isaac Lowe had found his true calling, and he was just getting started. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.